I'm sure that fall is in the air somewhere. It just doesn't happen to be here in Phoenix. I decided to attempt a pumpkin swirl cinnamon loaf to video for the Fall Food Friday collaboration on Moss Family TV, one of my favorite YouTube channels. So we're going to need flour. I'm using bread flour, white sugar, brown sugar, butter if you're just doing a cinnamon loaf, cinnamon, some salt, a can of pumpkin, but I only used about 1/4 cup, some vegetable oil, some active dry yeast. I used a little less than 2 packages. I also used cooking spray, and if you wanted to use pumpkin pie spice instead of cinnamon, that would probably work really well with this. So let's get started. To my Bosch mixer, I'm adding 4 cups of warm water, 1 tablespoon of yeast, and 1/2 cup of white sugar. I put the lid on the mixer and ran it for just a few seconds to get it all mixed together, and then left it for about 30 minutes. When I came back, it was beautiful and foamy and frothy and ready to add the other ingredients. 2 tablespoons of salt, and I added a scant 2 tablespoons. 1/2 cup of vegetable oil. Then the recipe called for 10 cups of flour. I usually start with 9 cups and then add the other cup as I go, because the Southwest in the United States is very dry. However, we've had a very wet summer, and so I ended up putting more flour in than I normally would. This is what it looked like after the 9 cups of flour had been mixed in, and it seemed too sticky, so I added another probably not quite a cup to it. And it's still sticky, so I added more flour. You want it to be able to pull away from the sides of the bowl and to also pull away from the middle part with this particular kind of mixer. As you can see, it's still too sticky here. Now it's formed into a nice dough, so I let it run on the medium speed for 5 minutes to knead the dough to develop the gluten. I'm greasing a large bowl with some vegetable oil, and then I also put the grease on my hands, and then take the dough out of the mixer and put it into the greased bowl. And you'll see the trouble that I had even getting it out of the bowl because it was so sticky, and I thought that I had surely ruined it, but it turned out to be a really nice textured bread. My bread making game changed when I started using bread flour and using less of it. So it looks like I have a horrible mess here, but just trust me, it will make your bread so much better. Once it's in the greased bowl, then flip it over so that it's greased on all sides, and then cover it with plastic wrap, just loosely. And put it in a draft-free, warmer place in your kitchen. While we're waiting for that to double in size, I'm going to go ahead and prepare or partially prepare the pans. I'm spraying them slightly with cooking spray so that some parchment paper will stay in the bottoms of the pans. Sometimes if the sugar mixture leaks out of the bread and sticks to the pans, it can be really hard to get your bread out of the pans. So I like to use parchment paper. An hour and a half later, and the bread dough has doubled in size. And so I go ahead and I spray the parchment paper in the pans and the sides that don't have parchment paper. I also open up the canned pumpkin and take the lid off of the brown sugar. And yes, that is a slice of bread in my brown sugar container. When I refilled the canister, the brown sugar was hard, so all you have to do is put a slice of bread in with it and it will make your brown sugar soft again. Save the plastic wrap because you can put that back over your formed loaves and you won't have to get more plastic wrap out. I punch down the bread dough and then I divide it in half, and then I will divide those halves in half again. So I'll get 4 loaves out of this batch. If you can believe it, this is actually a half of a batch from the recipe that I'm using. The original recipe makes 8 loaves of bread. But that's too big for my mixer, so I cut it in half. My counter is clean, and I'm putting just a little bit of oil on it so that the dough won't stick, and spreading it around and getting my hands nice and greased up as well. A quarter of the bread dough goes onto the counter, and I form it into a rectangle. This first loaf I used my rolling pin, but afterwards for the other 3 loaves I didn't, because I felt like I had better control and could do it just fine with my hands. So you want to make the width of the dough equal with the length of your pan. I'm just putting some of the pumpkin puree, a spoonful or 2, and spreading it onto the dough. If you've ever made cinnamon rolls before, this is the same procedure that you would do with the butter. Next, I'm adding a couple spoonfuls of brown sugar and then just spreading them on with my hand. Press the sugar down well so that when you roll up the dough that you have a nice tight roll. Next, sprinkle on as much cinnamon as you would like. If you want to try and use pumpkin pie spice, you could do that. And then I start with the end closest to me and I roll it up like you would a jelly roll or a pumpkin roll or a cinnamon roll, trying to keep it tight. Now I had some problems with this first one, so I'm going to show you a second one. There was a spot where the dough was rolled really thin, and when I stretched it and rolled it completely up, then the pumpkin started to come through. So you can see I'm pinching the seams together here, and then I usually push that end part in and then pinch it, but the pumpkin's trying to come out. It turned out fine. I put it so that it was on the bottom and it looked okay, but the next one turned out much better. So you'll put the seam side down onto the parchment paper. I made 2 of the loaves into pumpkin swirl cinnamon bread, and then decided to do the remaining 2 as just regular cinnamon bread. So instead of spreading the pumpkin onto the dough, you use butter and then do the rest of the process the same with the brown sugar and the cinnamon, and then roll it up and put it into the pans. I brush a little bit of oil onto the tops of the loaves, and then I put the plastic back over on them. I didn't have enough plastic, so I needed to get a new piece for the last loaf. And then they go in a warm place to rise for about an hour or hour and a half. It's been about an hour and a half and they're ready to bake. I've preheated my oven to 350 degrees, and so I'll put them in the oven for 30 minutes. It's hard to tell, but you may have noticed that I lowered my oven rack halfway through the baking process. So they are beautiful and golden brown, and the house smells oh so good. And yes, I know exactly which ones are the pumpkin swirl and which ones are the cinnamon. You can kind of see the pumpkin on that one loaf, but I can tell by the pans. I put them in specific pans. I put them out on a cooling rack to finish cooling, and all but the last loaf came out without a problem. Which is funny because that was the first loaf that I rolled up and had the problems with. So I had to just coax this one out a little bit with a knife, but it came out and it looks great. Now they've all cooled completely, and I cut a loaf so we could see what it looks like. This is the second one that I made, and I'm very pleased with how it turned out. The texture of the bread is very light and airy and soft. To me, the pumpkin is very delicate and doesn't impart a strong flavor to the bread. I don't think that it's much different than using the butter for the cinnamon bread. But there is a light pumpkin flavor, and it would be less calories than butter. And if you're vegan, that would be a good option as well. You need to store this in an airtight bag or container in the refrigerator since it does have pumpkin in it. The next day I cut a few slices of bread and toasted them in my toaster for my breakfast. And it was delicious. Be sure to check out the Fall Food Friday collaboration on Moss Family TV. I'll leave the link to their channel in the description box. Here you have my version of pumpkin swirl cinnamon bread using my friend Marcia's recipe for cinnamon bread. Leave the pumpkin out if you don't have it or don't like pumpkin, and use butter, sugar, and cinnamon for cinnamon bread. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.